Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to PCDP's Ward Forum. It is a forum, not a debate, so we get to hear from the two candidates. We have Kevin Dahl and Juan Padres with us. And I want to just thank Miranda Lopez, our director, who put this together, as well as the support staff at headquarters and the volunteers for making this happen. And now I'm going to turn it over to our moderators, Zoe Fife.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have you both. And we will start with 4-minute introductions, and then we have a set of questions. Each question will be a 3-minute response, and we will rotate who goes first. So we will kick it off with your introductions. Mr. Dahl, if you would like to go first.
Thanks. I'm a lifelong active Democrat and elected precinct committee person in precinct 166. I'm also an LD3 and CD2. Most of my political work has been volunteering on campaigns. I volunteered for and have received endorsements from Representative Raul Grijalva, Pima County Chair Sharon Bronson, Arizona Representative Andres Cano, Arizona Senator Kirsten Engel, and School Board Member Natalie Luna Rose, and others. A longtime conservationist, environmentalist, community leader, and I've learned a lot about the pressing environmental issues we face, climate change being the foremost that we're going to have to deal with here in Tucson. We need to make sure we continue to provide clean and affordable water, that our air is clean, and that we protect the fragile Sonoran Desert. These issues also affect most of the underrepresented members of our community. In my career, I've seen how inclusion, building coalitions, finding resources, careful research, and listening are important elements to achieving success. Some of you know I've done this work as Executive Director of Native Seed Search, Executive Director of Tucson Audubon Society, for the last decade as the Arizona Representative for National Parks Conservation Association. My family and I have lived in Ward 3 for 38 years in the same home. My wife, Van Miller, is a retired TUSD special education teacher who has served as president of our Samos Neighborhood Association for 8 years. Our son, Brian Dahl, works at Kino Learning Center and part-time at downtown clubs, helping DJs get folks in the audience off their feet and up dancing. Hashtag the guy who dances on Congress. So I understand the issues facing Ward 3 from both direct experience and from what I've been hearing from people when I've knocked on their doors. I've been doing a lot of that, from crumbling roads to a lack of affordable housing, the sudden arrival of 5G towers in unwanted locations, to dumping of trash in alleys. Some people I talk to have lost jobs to COVID, and others are concerned about how they're going to pay their rent. To address these issues and more, we need to bolster existing neighborhood associations, support new community leaders, help reestablish neighborhood associations in areas where they've gone dormant. Our path forward must include climate-friendly, sustainable jobs, weatherizing homes, installing solar, for instance. It must include support for locally owned businesses that are struggling, labor, keeping rents reasonable, and greater support for home ownership. We need to invest in infrastructure, especially green infrastructure, transportation, especially public transportation, and affordable housing. When I am elected, I will be joining a Ward 3 office that has already been working hard to inform and support residents on these issues. The City Council as well. So when I join both of these teams, I promise to help tackle these issues with hard work, accessibility, and transparency. Finally, many thanks to all of you who made this forum possible, and thanks to all who are attending via Zoom or on Facebook.
You actually have 1 minute left, so.
Let's go forward. I don't want to
Thank you, Mr.
delay
Dahl.
the questions.
Mr. Padres, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Juan Francisco Padres. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. I would like to thank the Democrats of Pima County Democrats for hosting, for allowing us to have this platform to express our views and our ideas. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank Mr. Kevin Dahl for making himself available to chat in this forum. Not all candidates do, so I'm very thankful that Mr. Dahl is willing to share his afternoon as well to share. So thank you all. Again, Juan Padres here. I am obviously running here in Ward 3. A little bit about myself. I am a native of Nogales, Sonora. I've been here in Tucson since 1999, where I came here to study. I have my Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and my Master's of Business Administration. So I've done a little bit, I have a very diverse background. I've done a little bit of everything, as I like to say. I've owned multiple businesses, everything from a restaurant to a bar, to a logistics company, to an insurance agency. I've worked in the private sector for 2 Fortune 100 companies, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, where I managed a team of compliance analysts. And I had the opportunity to work in an artificial intelligence company, Too Simple, here in Tucson, who recently went public in NASDAQ. So it is now a public company. I had the pleasure of being their public affairs and business development manager. Also had the opportunity to work for the city of Tucson as their economic development specialist for 6 years under 3 different city managers. So I had have a very good feel of what the city of Tucson does, how it does it, and what are many of the issues. I'm also president of the nonprofit Tucson Sister Cities Inc., which is an organization that promotes cultural, economic, educational, and humanitarian ties between its sister cities, particularly in Mexico. So I've had experience also working in the nonprofit sector, and I've been a member of multiple boards in the community, boards and commissions, both in the private sector and the public sector. So I'm running for Ward 3 because I love Tucson, but Tucson has a big problem. It has a poverty problem. We all know it. We talk about it in different ways, whether it's social justice, food justice, racial justice, but ultimately it's a poverty issue. And I think it needs to be addressed, and addressing that will solve many other issues by being proactive, such as crime, obviously homelessness, transportation issues. There will be more money in the community for that. So I'm really looking to tackle that through economic development. Attracting jobs, investment to Tucson. It's very important. We need those jobs so people actually can sustain themselves, spend money, have better quality of life. We need to invest in our workforce. We need to invest in affordable housing. We can't have people go to jobs if they don't have a place to live. So that we have a housing issue right now. We need to invest in transportation. People need to be able to get to their centers of employment efficiently and readily available to them. We need to work in our paving. Our streets, as it's been mentioned, are in terrible shape. Big concern from the neighbors. And finally, we have a big crime issue. Crime is up 55% in Tucson in the last year. So one of my goals is to reduce the crime rate way below to what it is. And I think it takes a whole village to do that. So again, I'm Juan Padres, and I'll be happy to answer the next questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. And just for our participants, attendees here in the webinar, if you have questions for our candidates today, please use the Q&A feature. And if you're watching live on Facebook, you can go ahead and comment, and your question may get asked as well. So we'll kick it off with the first question, for starting with Mr. Padres. What would be your top 2 priorities if you were to represent Ward 3 on the City Council?
Excellent. My top 2 priorities, number 1 would be economic development, like I mentioned. I think economic development is the driver, the biggest driver to mitigate poverty. We need jobs. We need to create that opportunity for residents from all walks of life to have access to good paying, sustainable jobs in our community. So we need to attract investment. We need to invest in distressed areas in our community to eliminate that poverty sector. The other part that I would be focusing on is crime reduction, especially in Ward 3. Ward 3 is not only the poorest ward in our community, but it also has the highest crime rate. If you read the paper, if you watch the news, most shootings, burglaries that are reported it's no coincidence that they are in Ward 3. And it has a lot of us scared of what's going on, because it's not just petty theft or nuisances. These are very disturbing crimes that are going on in our community. And I mentioned this in different forums. If you guys remember the guy with the bayonet running that was shot by an officer, that happened right on the next street across from my house. So I see that, the neighbors see it, and it's very, very important for all of us to tackle this issue of crime. And again, it is a derivative of poverty. So one goes with the other. Economic development to mitigate the poverty factor, which ultimately will be a proactive approach to mitigating crime, in addition to being reactive on the crime side as well. So those are my two top priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl?
Well, with my background in environmental work, climate change is what I'm putting forward as my first priority. Tucson has got to come to grips with how we're going to deal with rising temperatures, which is looks like it's being combined with a mega drought in the Southwest. So we need to be able to adapt, mitigate, and take immediate measures, whatever we can, to reduce carbon output so that we're just not heating up the planet as fast as we can. Now, you would think, well, that's pretty esoteric and it's a global problem, but global problems do have local solutions. And the impacts are going to be stronger, more horrible on people who don't have the ability to pay an air conditioning electric bill, who don't have the ability to stay cool. Heat kills. My second priority is neighborhoods. You know, I'm a neighborhood guy. I've done all sorts of projects in my neighborhood, from helping with the traffic calming plan we did for my neighborhood, to establishing a bulletin board and being involved in neighborhood parties and governance. So promoting that, I think, is real important. You know, poverty is key, and to do neighborhoods, we need to involve everybody. We need to involve the police. We need to involve small business. And small and local businesses, you know, are the backbone. They create the most jobs, the biggest bang for the buck. And it's just, you know, we have to be aware that we're losing small businesses. They're struggling. And so I would work to see however the city could help small businesses stay alive and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. All right, question 2. Do you support the Regional Transportation Authority as it is currently operating? If not, what changes would you make in the next RTA plan? Mr. Dahl, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, we've run up against the RTA in my neighborhood in the expansion of Grant Road, which was promised by a certain time, and promises were made and not kept, not only in the completion of it, but what they were going to do and provide. I'm very concerned about the RTA for a number of reasons. Tucson, which has a majority of people, has 1 vote compared to Marana and the other entities that are involved in it. Tucson is going through a transportation planning process, Move Tucson. I think Tucson should continue that process and continue to get local involvement from everybody and go forward with its own plan. The RTA, I don't support the RTA at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Padres.
Thank you. I've always been of the belief that the high tide raises all ships. And when people come to Tucson, whether it is Marana, Oro Valley, Tucson, Sahuarita, everybody says Tucson. You know, nobody, you know, flies in here saying, oh, I'm flying into the city of South Tucson. So short answer is yes, I do support the RTA. I think it can be tweaked and it can be fixed, but I mean, we all live here. When we drive, when we walk, you don't know when you're in Tucson or when you're in unincorporated Pima County or when you're in Marana. It's seamless, and we need to work as a region to make everything suitable, not only for residents, for businesses, for visitors, for everybody. I don't believe that we, you know, if Oro Valley prospers, Tucson prospers, because they'll shop here. If Tucson prospers, you know, some people might live in Marana. So I do believe that we are a very interconnected region. Everybody knows each other. So I think it is important to invest in our entire community, in our entire region. A lot of the sales tax that are spent by residents of Oro Valley, by Marano, by Sahuarita are spent in Tucson. People who live in Sahuarita shop at Costco in Tucson city limits. And people come to the mall, in Tucson Mall, which is in Ward 3, from all over the region, including Nogales. So I do support the RTA. I think it is a good opportunity to improve the economic vitality of the entire region, not just Tucson, which I think we all benefit because we are all in it together here. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Question 3. Do you support the proposed accessory dwelling unit amendments proposed by City Council? Mr. Padres, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I do. What are they called? The nana pads or the houses? Yes, it is important. I think one of the reasons, first and foremost, is to create density. I think we're sprawl. I'm not a big fan of sprawl, and I think affordable attached dwellings, I messed up my words, are an opportunity for infill, which is also good for the environment. We need to create density in our community. It'll allow for transportation. We'll already have the infrastructure. We'll already have the water. I mean, why go out when we can live here? So there's a lot of parcels out there that are very large that can accommodate that, not just for personal reasons, like they say that the nana housing to bring in family and friends or rent it out, but it is a way to really create density in our community, which is beneficial, I think, like I mentioned, for multiple reasons. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
I tend to support it with some caveats. The devil's in the details in this. Having families be able to expand, we used to call them mother-in-law units, age in place, have extra bedrooms. That's very beneficial, and density is very beneficial for providing services like public transportation. But in my neighborhoods, people have used zoning changes such as that to create mini dorms and ridiculous situations that are uncomfortable to their neighbors and impact their neighbors. And there's a concern about this just being a great way for Airbnbs to make money. So the devil is in the details. In general, I like accessory dwelling units where there's space. I think landscaping and making sure we're not adding to the heat island is part of it, but let's get some density, but let's do it right. And I suspect the city council will solve this problem before Juan or I get a chance to weigh in as elected officials. But that's my nuanced answer.
Thank you both. All right. COVID has brought a long brewing housing crisis to the surface in Tucson. With the eviction moratorium coming to an end and rent prices continuing to increase, what are your plans for housing in Tucson? Mr. Dahl, you start this one off with 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, this is an increasing and horrible problem, the price of housing, either to buy a house or to rent a house. Tucson is restricted in some areas. Rent controls might be appropriate, but in this state, we don't have the ability to do that. I think what we have the ability to do is to create housing ourselves as a city and to encourage other nonprofit affordable housing situations and encourage, I don't think that we can, and I might be mistaken, I don't think we can require affordable units in new construction, but the city should do whatever it could to provide more affordable housing, not just for people who are poor, but for people who are working too. You get a job in Tucson, and it used to be great because our cost of living was, reasonable. As housing goes up, the cost of living is hard for workers. So the city should invest in affordable housing wherever it can, and it should promote it wherever it can. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Padres?
Affordable housing is a key issue in my campaign. As you all know, Housing prices have gone through the roof in the last 2 years. It's incredibly difficult to find an affordable home or even affordable rent nowadays. So it is a big issue. And if we are to come out of these economic downturn, we need to be able to house our workforce. And I propose different ways of tackling this issue. Number one, there are city properties that we could build on specifically for affordable housing. I think that's very doable. It can be run or developed by a private or nonprofit, but there is city land that is available to do that. Also, there's a lot of land, there's a lot of properties. For example, I always use this example, the Amphi Plaza on First and Fort Lowell. It's been deteriorating for years. I mean, it is blight. Why can't we take that property and allow loosen the zoning restrictions where you can do multiple things there? You can do housing, you can do commercial, eliminate some of the parking requirements. So mixed use development is very important in the center of town, where I would love to see something there that is not just deteriorating or dilapidating. So we can be very flexible with our zoning laws in allowing affordable housing to come in. We can incentivize by reducing or eliminating impact fees for affordable housing. So I think it's very doable. Those are tools that the city has currently in its toolkit that we can go out and use. So whether it's public land, teaming up with nonprofits or other organizations, and we're loosening up the zoning in dilapidated areas, we can build it and really accommodate our workforce, which is key. So very, very important part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. The issue of police violence has been brought to the forefront, from George Floyd to Carlos Lopez in Tucson. What do you see as the role of police in the community? What changes would you make to achieve this role? And Mr. Padres, you have 3 minutes.
I think policing in general, whether it's in Tucson or across the nation, we need to rethink how we handle our police departments. But policing, nevertheless, is a very important part of our community. We need to have that resource for when something happens. Ultimately, who are you going to call? I propose we need to really look at our ranks, and I would like to see a more diverse police force in our community. We need to incentivize minorities, people of color, into joining the police force that look like the people they are policing in those neighborhoods. That's number one. Number two, I think we can do more with community service officers. There's a lot of calls, whether it's for a beer run at a Circle K, or a car that was stolen the night before and they just found out in the morning. You don't need to send a fully armed peace officer. You can send probably a community service officer where they just take up the report and take pictures if needed. But I think those things can be not outsourced, that's not the right word, but given to a different department or a different department within the police department to take care of. So we're not using armed officers at every given instance unless it's an emergency. I also would like to see a more community approach to joining the police force in our reserve police department. I think it's something that Phoenix does very well, where people from the community, possibly retired officers or school teachers or nurses, they can engage in a police department and be part of that force on the weekends. I think Phoenix requires 20 hours a week. So we have to get creative. I think there's ways of doing this in addition to bringing in, like I said, the diversity. But I fully support our police department. I think there's great people working there. I've had the pleasure of meeting many when I was at the city. So and we need them ultimately to start reducing that crime rate, because it is now a quality of life issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl?
I, like everybody, I abhor and was outraged by the death of George Floyd and all the too many instances of police violence against people of color across the country. I know that racism in our country is systemic and baked into our institutions. We can't get away from that. And I also know that as a white man, privileged white man, I experience interactions with police in a very different way than most people of color. So that informs my my views about the police. I do believe that TBD is a progressive department, relatively speaking, and that they are doing some good things, but there's always room for improvement. For instance, I applaud Mayor and Council for supporting TBD's hiring of 6 social workers as a start. And they created the SERB, the Sentinel Event Review Board, which was convened to review the facts and circumstances that led to the tragic death of Carlos Income, in hopes that it will never happen again. We do need community-based review of police actions, transparency and dialogue, and engagement with communities of color on how policing impacts them. I know we also need to address the very real issue of crime, along with the issues of addiction, mental health, and poverty, that there's not one size fits all solution. I also believe we need to get the number of officers up to appropriate staffing numbers for a city of our size. We need to be competitive in pay and keep trained, experienced officers from leaving to go to other jurisdictions. Everyone wants for their family and their neighborhood to be safe. And that's our goal. I plan to continue to listen, engage, and be part of this important conversation so that we can work towards this in Ward 3 and in Tucson.
Thank you. A follow-up question on that topic. If Chief Magnus is confirmed by the Senate, City Council will be tasked with selecting his replacement. What are the top 3 priorities you see for Chief of Police in Tucson? Mr. Dahl?
Well, that's a great and interesting question, which I haven't even thought about, but let me just brainstorm it out loud. He came, when we hired Chief Magnus, he came with a lot of great experience in a difficult community to police. And so I think we're looking for someone with a lot of experience, especially with communities of color. We wanted to see a police chief who has some vision for dealing with public concern about how policing is done. Ideally, it'd be someone who knows our community. So I think we're going to have, maybe there's someone within the department or someone else in law enforcement locally who could apply. That may not be the key criteria, but I think it's always interesting to see if that can be found. So we want someone who will build on what Chief Magnus and the police have done and help us build the force into the sort of public safety department that Tucson wants and deserves.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. Mr. Padres?
I think it's a huge loss for us having Chief Magnus, although, I congratulate him on the appointment, on the nomination, which you probably will be appointed. That's great for the country, but leaves us in a tight spot where we need to find a new chief. I think, relatively speaking, we need somebody who has the same values that Tucsonans have. I do believe that we could possibly find somebody inside our department. I've always been a very big supporter of hiring from within, from people who already know the community, who know the politics per se. And I mean, with the department that already has some of the goodwill with the police, with the unions, with the different neighborhoods. So I would look at that very heavily within our department, but ultimately we do need to find somebody that shares the value, the vision, a more progressive approach to policing, somebody who shares that. Hopefully a person of color would be great here in our community. I think we're slowly becoming a minority majority community. We're not there yet, but we're going in that direction. But it is the minority communities that usually are policed, or there's more incidents in those communities. So I would really like to see that somebody who understands it, whether it's from a different department from across the country, who's had those similar experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question. Do you support the implementation of differential water rates? Why or why not? Mr. Padres?
Yes, I support a minor increment with possibly a 5 to 10% increase. From what I understand and what city staff has published and said out to the public is that there is an extra cost to provide that service. to more elevated locations, which, if that is the case, then yes, I think a 5 to 10% differential rate is appropriate. I do not support a 30, 40, or 50% differential rate, because ultimately you're going to be affecting those who are impoverished outside of Tucson city limits, and there are areas within our community that are outside of city limits that are not necessarily in an elevated the foothills per se. That we would need to look at that. And everybody, some of the things that have been talked about the differential water rates is that, well, if you are poor, you're going to get a discount, or that impact won't be. But like Kevin mentioned in the previous question, the devil's in the details. How much is poor? Where is that threshold? Because you can be a widower on fixed income, and you're technically not poor if you're on Social Security and maybe a small pension or savings there, and you won't qualify for that rate. So qualifying as poor is a very big question, and I wouldn't want to burden anybody outside of, because again, and as I mentioned in an earlier question, I think we're all in this together. We are one community. It is Tucson, and I wouldn't want to burden somebody outside of Tucson city limits that's on fixed income or has a lower income, but it's not technically poor, with something like 50 or 40%. So I would support something in the 5 to 10% range. Thank you.
I also support the differential rate in some form or another, perhaps maybe a little higher rate than Mr. Padres is talking about. This is standard operating practice for most municipalities in Tucson and elsewhere. When you're delivering water outside your service area, you charge full rates, or even have a more, and that money could be used by Tucson. It shouldn't go back into the central, our regular fund. It should be used specifically for water projects, for helping people who are struggling paying their water bills. And again, how that's determined would be important, and it should include those people outside of the city of Tucson. If this is what pushes them over the edge with being able to pay their bills, there should be some compensation for that. So yeah, I'm going to testify before the city council Tuesday that I do support them, and support the city council and the staff in working through those details so that it benefits the city of Tucson. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. Next question, a little bit of a follow-up. What can the city of Tucson do to ensure its water future? Mr. Dahl?
Yeah, well, we're the recipient of a $5 billion federal project bringing us water from the Colorado. I think that's the last big thing that's going to happen to bring water here. So we need to start living within our water budget. The Tucson Water in the city of Tucson has been smart in storing water underground. Besides, it helps improve the quality of the water that we eventually use, and they should continue that. We need to educate people, water users, not to waste water. We need to look for ways in the system that we can prevent water from being wasted, and there's simple technological devices, low flow on your water spigot, watering not in the middle of the day, but when it's cooler and it's not going to evaporate before it reaches your plants. So there's a dozen ways of doing that. We should be harvesting rainwater for landscapes and encouraging that in all the ways we can. 100 different ways to do that. And because we need to learn to live within our water budget, and education really is the key.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. Mr. Padres?
I agree with Kevin that education is key. That is a primary thing that we as a community, as a city council, we need to educate. I think there's been a very successful campaign to teach our community about recycling. I think the same can be done about water, about how do we conserve water, generally speaking, with low water use toilets and the latter. I think as a community, we've been very good. You don't see that many people with lawns around town that we live in the desert. So, I think we should continue to encourage using desert vegetation in our yards and in public rights of way, et cetera. So a lot of things we've been doing right that we need to continue. On the economic side, I think we need to be very picky as to who we allow into our community to come and do business. I think there are very water intensive companies out there or businesses that maybe Tucson's not the right fit. And then maybe they should go to another state on that end. But we need to be very protective on that end as to who we allow, the different types of, be picky on the types of development and where that may cost us water. So I would like to, should I get elected, be very, have a very keen eye on those types of projects, in addition to educating. That goes a very long way with our community. We teach it to our kids. I'm of the generation where they used to say, if it's yellow, let it mellow type, that's probably old now, but there's ways of doing that. I think it does come down to that. Thank you.
Thank you. We will ask a few questions now that we've gotten from the audience, starting with, are you for or against basing the F-35s in Tucson? And Mr. Padres, you'll go first.
Thank you. I think the base is an integral part of our community. I think it's a very large economic driver. It employs roughly 8,000 to 8,000 people between active duty and civilian. So it is a big part of Tucson, of our community. I do support it. I think it'll bring more jobs to Tucson. It'll continue to be an economic driver. It'll allow us to secure contracts from the Department of Defense, and ultimately puts Tucson on the map. I mean, anybody who's a pilot from an A-10 has been to Tucson probably to train. So, and it brings people retire here because they came here to the base. I know I have a lot of friends who were located here. They were sent to Tucson and they stayed. And it adds to our quality workforce, because not only do you get the pilots, but a lot of the technicians that are relevant for our workforce. I think it has its challenges, like everything, especially in the noise side. But if I've thought about this through and through, and I think if you were to put it on a scale, I think the benefits outweigh the cons. I really do believe it would be good, very, very good economically speaking, for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl?
Well, I disagree, except that I think the base is an important economic driver, and the Air Force is a part of our community. And as they've studied the F-35, I think they've decided that it would be problematic to house them here in Tucson. So I don't think we should lobby them to bring a plane that will cause them problems, because there are a lot of neighborhoods around the Air Force Base that would be affected by the noise of this particularly loud plane. There's a lot of things that could happen in the base. This is probably one of the things that shouldn't. And so we'll disagree on that. Thanks.
Thank you both. The next question from our audience, how important to you is protecting historic homes and neighborhoods in Tucson? Mr. Dahl?
Well, I have a personal story about that. Our neighborhood looked at becoming a historic neighborhood, and my wife and her friend, Catherine Lancaster, did so much research, they eventually wrote a book, and I'll advertise it. You can get it on Amazon. Samos, the stories that made a neighborhood, because there were just wonderful stories about the people who lived here and continue to live in Samos. We decided it didn't make economic sense to go for that designation, but I really appreciate the historic nature of many of our neighborhoods, and I think protecting that's real important through historic designations and appropriate overlays. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Padres?
We have the privilege of living in one of the oldest regions in the country, and there's a lot of history here. I studied political science and history, and I'm a big history guy. So yes, I do support it completely. We have some fantastic architecture. We have fantastic history within the different buildings, especially if you start getting towards our downtown area, and the surrounding areas are excellent. You know, the homes have so much character, and it's a character that really speaks to Tucson, to our history, as once being part of Mexico and once being part of Spain. You know, it goes with that history, even our native culture. So yes, I'm absolutely a fan of it, and I'm all about historic preservation. Thank you.
Thank you. In addition to job creation, what else would you support for lowering poverty rates? Would you support universal basic income payments to a selected population, for example? Mr. Padres, you'll go first.
I think the universal income payment is out of scope of what a city council would do. I think that's at a federal level. Should our congressional delegation and favor that, I would support. But I think that is something that's way above our paycheck here as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl.
Given a chance to decide, I think universal income, much like Medicaid for all, is a great way to make a great society. I've seen it in England, where it solves a lot of problems, and we're a rich enough country so that we have the resources to do something like that. But Mr. Padres is right. Tucson City Council is not going to do it. There are some things that we can do in the community to fight poverty and unemployment. We can promote education. We can promote training. Pima College provides a great pathway for many people. Providing childcare so that people can work, and the Tucson does an after-school and summer program with KidCo. Those sort of services help people who are working their way up and working. And I think the city should continue to support programs like that and expand them.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. What kind of public transportation should we grow in Tucson, and how do you propose to do it? Mr. Dahl?
Well, I'd like to see the modern streetcar expand where it seems appropriate using federal funding. Our bus system can be improved and run more often at more beneficial times, and be as cheap as possible, perhaps free. I think getting people into buses is a public good. Even as a car driver, the fewer people on the street, the less likely you're going to get into an auto accident or bad traffic. This is a bicycling town. We need to continue to promote bicycling, especially bike lanes that are not adjacent to traffic, that are separated so that they're much safer. And even walking, creating walkable neighborhoods. Part of the Million Trees initiative should focus on getting trees in areas that lead people from where they live to public transit access. I see some bus stops that are shaded and people love that. And I see some that are just broiling out there in the summer. So there's many ways we can promote public transit, and all of those modes should be part of the package that we provide our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Padres?
I would like to see an electric fleet of vehicles. I think that's the direction that the council should be heading. I think if we are to go carbon free within the next decade, that is one of the biggest polluters is large buses. So I would really like to see zero emission public buses and vans, or at least switch to hybrid on the van side if unavailable. But that being said, I also want to see a more nimble bus system or van. I think the bus accommodates much of our workforce, but there are others who don't necessarily have that connectivity because of where they live. So I would like to see programs out there that would cater more specific, more tailored to the needs of individuals who possibly don't have access to public transportation. And on that note, when we talk about public transportation, the roads are a big issue as well. So it goes hand in hand. We need to have a very nice mix of not only just our a bus system, a modern bus system, but we also need the roads to accommodate individuals who ride their bikes or motorcycles or even walk. Not all of our streets are or have sidewalks. They're not walkable. We're really not a walkable community, and that's a big thing for us. We need to go in that direction where you make it easy, you make it safe. Because as I've mentioned in previous conversations, we have a problem with people getting run over. So we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there for people who are walking, possibly people in wheelchairs. We really need to invest in that, and that is a top priority for me. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question that came in on Facebook. The city has embraced a population growth mindset, be it incentivizing development with CBD, GPLET, and overlays, or relocation subsidies. Would you support the continued drive for growth and expansion? If so, how would you reconcile this with limited water resources and the heat island effect we have seen in the city? Mr. Padres?
It's a difficult question, but so a city that's not growing dies, and we've seen it over and over. If we're not growing, we're dying. So we need to continue to grow to thrive. A lack of growth leads to poverty, leads to a lower quality of life. People leave. If we're not growing, if there's not job opportunities for our residents, we die. We leave. Our children will leave. We will leave because there will be no opportunity. There will be no money to sustain our quality of life. I understand the difficulty that, yes, we do live in the desert and we have limited resources on that, and we definitely don't like the Phoenix heat island effect. But I think we have to be very careful in how do we do this. I do support density. I don't support sprawl. So if we grow, I think we should incentivize growing within the core of our community and reusing dilapidated properties or underutilized assets. I think that's the way to grow smartly and sustainably is by doing that. But we do need to grow. And then on the incentive end, sometimes you do need to incentivize individuals or companies to develop in areas that are less desirable, for lack of a better word. If not, they'll go someplace else, which potentially could create sprawl. So, and you can do that with overlays, with economic incentives like the GPLETs, et cetera. I've personally done those, written those for the city of Tucson, for the council. So it's not all necessarily bad. I don't support incentivizing for the sake of incentivizing, like many companies have, in fact, received incentives that really shouldn't have. Should I get elected, I will be watching that like a hawk. Do they really need that incentive, and who is it going to, and why? And I think we need to do much better due diligence on behalf of the economic development team, because I know that many companies have received incentives in the past that should have not. So if we will do that, it will be for a good purpose. It will be for affordable housing. It will be for something that it's going to create density. It's going to create something that's sustainable within our community, not just for the sake of doing it or giving away free money. That's not what I'm about. Thank you.
In nature and in human economy, there is nothing that can continue to grow indefinitely. And there will be a limit in the Tucson Valley, and it will be based on water. Studies by Pima County shows that we could maybe double the number of people here with the water that we have. I'm not sure if I want to live in a Tucson that has that many people in it. We can plan and we can stop encouraging growth. Growth will happen without the city encouraging it. I don't understand why we're giving incentives to people to move here and work remotely from tech centers in California. There's an urban planning principle called shrinking to greatness. Let's figure out what's the appropriate size for communities and parts of our communities, and let's plan to achieve that appropriate size. Sustainable jobs, sustainable stuff doesn't mean that you're growing forever. That's someone once said that's the that's the mission of a cancer cell. So let's do some of these things. Let's discourage sprawl. Let's get a little more density. Let's do infrastructure that serves a lot of people through appropriate planning. But let's not think of growth as one of our goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have another question from the Zoom group with, how can we dramatically develop clean, safe, renewable energy in low-income communities and other ways to address climate change? Mr. Dahl?
Well, we can start doing it. You know, it's economic. It's cheaper to produce solar and wind than fossil fuel-based electricity. So let's retrofit places. Let's put solar on parking lots. So people love to park in shade. Let's retrofit people's houses. Let's provide incentives for that. Let's provide investment for that. If I was fortunate enough, I can afford to put solar on my house, but other people need investment help, that the investment is paid back and makes some interest for somebody else. But in the meantime, they're enjoying solar energy, which is great. So through private-public partnership, we should look especially at those areas that are the poorly served heat island areas, and provide the sort of investment for water harvesting, for instance. So you can grow trees and you don't have to spend as much electricity and pay as many bills to cool your house. So there's lots of methods of doing that. It takes a vision and it takes a will and it takes some implementation. And that's why I'm trying to get elected to this spot, by the way.
Thank you. Mr. Padres?
You know, I've thought about this long and hard. How do we address this issue? You know, how do we bring clean energy to communities of color or more impoverished? And you know, there's ideas out there that other communities are doing. You know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but you know, we could bond for solar farms and have them store in batteries and provide that clean energy to impoverished or low-income communities. If they're backed by the city of Tucson, I mean, we have the revenue to pay for that. So, I mean, it is if the community has the will to do it, I think there is the way, and it is through that. I mean, we can bond for that. And, you know, we would have to obviously, I think it'd be a fantastic idea if we could get together with Pima County, with the university, with Pima Community College and bond and say, hey, let's put this, obviously we would have to work with TEP, but there's ways to do this. I think there's enough movement out there. I think we have the proper elected officials in all levels of government to support this. And we can put it on the table and take it to the people and say, okay, we're ready to do this. Let's bond for this. Let's start producing solar energy and distributing. And if the people vote for it, absolutely, I'm all in. So there's things we can do, and we need to get creative. And there's communities that are already doing it. So absolutely, let's get to work on that. Thank you.
Thank you both. Next up, a question from the community. How should we specifically address racism in our community? Mr. Padres?
That is a phenomenal question. Thank you. Well, first and foremost, Ward 3 has never had a minority council member. It's always been a white individual. And Ward 3 now is half of it is a minority. Half of the people residing in Ward 3 belong to a minority, and I think 40% of them are Hispanic. And in the city of Tucson in general, about 40% of our community is Hispanic, and we're close to becoming a minority majority community. As a individual who came from a different country, I grew up, born, raised in Nogales, Sonora. I speak the language. Actually, my Spanish is better than my English. I think it's part of advocacy. There's an advocacy side on the city council, but with our federal legislatures, our state legislators, and really going out into the community and letting people know, encouraging people to speak up, to participate. I was looking right now at the people who are watching this right now on Zoom, and there are very few people with a last name that could potentially lead you to believe it's Hispanic. It's mostly white people. And there's a lack of participation in the community. I go to forums, whether it's with a party or different organizations, and we still need to invite, whether it's Hispanics, African Americans, Native Americans, we need to bring them in and bring them to the table, but they have to feel welcome and that they are part of the community. And that in part happens if the people who are there look like you. You don't want to walk into a room where everybody is completely different. And that goes in our government model, whether it's municipal, county, state, et cetera. So it is being an advocate. It is being the voice for them, which I could very, very well be, because like I said, that is my culture. That is who I am. That is part of my identity. It's very seamless for me to do that. And I think I could really elevate the conversation here in Tucson about immigration, about racial justice. I think those are key topics that I can speak to as a person of color, and having friends and family who are here undocumented. So it is a subject that is near and dear to my heart that I would be a champion of. Thank you.
As I said earlier, I strongly know, it's not a belief, that racism is systemic. It's across the country. It's part of our community. It's part of me. I've grown up racist, and I work hard to be anti-racist, knowing that living in a racist society, I can never call myself not racist. We need to work on it together. We need to listen to all, and especially engage with the communities of color and ask and listen, what are solutions that involve them. There hasn't been a person of color in this ward because people of color in this ward tend not to vote. And so that's a systemic problem, and we need to address that. And the darn Republicans, right? That's the way they like it. And thank you, Democratic Party, for fighting all those things across the country to prevent people from voting. I'm willing to work on this issue, and I have worked on this issue from a young age. I've done the workshops, I've participated, and I will continue to participate as a leader of this ward, because when I'm elected, I will represent everybody in the ward, and there needs to be some work done in this area. Thanks.
Thank you both. How should we effectively and compassionatately address homelessness? Mr. Dahl?
I was just thinking about this because yesterday someone asked for some water. I asked, I'd be glad to fill your bottle from my hose. Are you homeless? And yes. So I think individually, there's ways of helping people who are not able to have a home. From what I understand from people who are working this issue, the best step is to get somebody into some sort of housing. That you can't get a job, you can't go to a job, if you can't clean up and wash your clothes, know that the stuff that you do have has a safe place for while you're going to a job. So housing's first, and then programs that deal with the problems that brought people to homelessness. And it might be drugs, and it might be mental illness, and it might be economic situation, it might be a domestic situation. But we need social workers, and there are some, and there are some working on this who are well trained in this, who can deal with the many different reasons why people are homeless and try to get them housing. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Padres?
I think the biggest issue with homelessness is, and I worked at the city of Tucson where this was a big issue in downtown and different areas, and the big issue is mental health. Most of the people who are homeless have a mental health or an addiction problem. So it's not so much that they don't want to work or have the skills or the lack thereof. It's the fact that their mental health problem they're sick ultimately. They can't control that. They need help. And we don't have the resources in our community for that. We need to work with our federal delegation, with our state legislators, with our county health department or county supervisors, with the entire community to see how do we, as a community, address this, because it requires a lot of money and it requires laws to be changed, in essence, to really help these people, get them the necessary resources, and ultimately it's the help, the medication, the doctors, which costs money, and a lot of these people need to be. We need to hold their hand and take them and allow them to get that help. There are those who have become homeless because of a job loss or death, whatever, that is not necessarily tied to a mental health issue. They're usually quick to get back on their feet because we have the resources in the community. There are numerous housing opportunities, whether it's through nonprofits or religious organizations that provide people the skills. There's Pima County One Stop. There's multiple resources. Those people usually get back on their feet relatively quickly, but it's the ones who are suffering from the disease of addiction or mental health that we really need to look at and address it as a community. How do we help them? And it's a very difficult conversation to have because there is not one solution. It requires a lot of money. It requires a lot of will from every government agency. So I'm all for helping and funding, should that be necessary, a program to really get people out of the street and get them the appropriate help they need. Thank you.
Thank you both. How would you propose making Ward 3 more accessible for your neighbors with disabilities? Mr. Padres, you go first on this one.
Thank you. Yes, sidewalks. And we need wider sidewalks in certain areas. It is very important to have marked crosswalks. And that's one of the problems of Tucson that I mentioned earlier. We are not a walkable community. And if somebody has a disability that they need to move by wheelchair, or somebody pushing them, or an electrified vehicle or electric chair or scooter type, it's even harder to get around. I walk the neighborhood, do a little jogging sometimes outside of the Rito, and it's dirt roads with rocks, and you have a wire sticking out, and you don't know if it's an electric thing that might shock you. So we need to be very we need to put our money there in making it safe to cross the street. The amount, I keep saying it, the amount of pedestrians getting run over in Tucson, it's ridiculous. It shouldn't be happening. So we have to address that. And that helps everybody, not just people with disabilities. It helps the elderly, it helps children, it helps somebody with groceries. So we really need to make this a very walkable community by investing in the infrastructure and cleaning it. Sometimes you can't pass because there's weeds the size of bamboo trees that disallow people to walk. So we need to clean that up. We need to clean the weeds. We need to rake it. And not only does it create jobs, but ultimately it makes our community more beautiful and more accessible, and it increases the quality of life. Thank you.
Well, I agree with all those technical solutions of better sidewalks, better walkability on easements. I think to get that solution, we need strong neighborhood associations and nonprofits that focus on helping people. In my neighborhood and in a number of neighborhoods in this area, there's a great organization called Lend a Hand that matches up people who are trying to stay in their homes as they grow older with volunteers who will provide services. And many of these older people do become disabled. And so it's simply a matter of they don't have the wherewithal to get to refurbish their stairs so that they can go down a ramp to get out of their house. But through this nonprofit, they're matched up with a carpenter who has time on his hands, probably retired himself, and he can do that. The social glue that keeps us together is important as for people who are disabled and stuck in their house and need help. And so promoting neighborhood associations and helping nonprofits in that way is just as important as, finding funding sources for sidewalks and making sure they're ADA compliant. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's see. Specifically, what affordable housing initiatives would you recommend to the mayor and city council?
Well, I think I mentioned this before. There seems to be two ways the city can help. One is we can own property, like when we widen Grant, there's houses that are available that will be slated to be torn down, maybe next year, maybe 20 years from now. And that can become affordable housing. And there's other city properties that could be used for that. And we can help and provide incentives for nonprofits that are doing that work. I'm particularly interested in the model of land trusts. I have this thought that and it's, again, probably beyond the city of Tucson's ability to implement, but in my neighborhood, I know of at least one, maybe more, houses that are abandoned for family situations. Someone died and the person who's inherited has not become interested in it yet. So we have empty houses sitting around. Maybe that house will be sold at auction and by a developer who will pay the back taxes and pay something in the auction, and it will come back into the housing market. But maybe rather than that being the only model, why can't those houses quickly be retrofitted to provide affordable housing for the programs that we need? Those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Padres.
I think one of the tools the city has is, as the council decides on a lot of the zoning, we can change the zoning on a lot of properties to create affordable housing. If there's, again, going back to this, we can do mixed use development where a property that's primarily been for commercial purposes can now be built, redeveloped for housing. So again, I'd love to go back to the Amphi Plaza, tear it down, or not tear it down, but build it up where half of it is, or 3/4 of it are affordable housing units. And there could be incentives for somebody to come and do those. And then have some commercial where people who live there could potentially go outside and shop, maybe a small grocer or different stores. I would love to see ethnic retailers there. So, there's a lot we can do, but the key is giving the tools to those who want to invest in affordable housing, such as zoning, eliminating a lot of the parking requirements. People don't build housing because the parking requirements do not allow it. You need X amount of parking units per square feet. So you say, wait a minute, you're on Grant Road or you're on Fort Lowell Road. You don't need so much parking. People are using their bike or riding the bus. So let's put that to the side. That's technicality that doesn't help anybody. It just leaves the property there vacant and decaying. So let's give the tools. Let's allow individuals to say, yes, this makes sense. Let's do it. Let's incentivize affordable housing in areas that we need to bring life back to them. There's homelessness around there. There's drug use. In many cases, I've heard from neighbors that there's rats and cockroaches. So let's get rid of that, revitalize it, and create affordable housing units close to the centers of employment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have 2 more questions for each of you. And the first one is, do you support ending R1 and R2 zoning? Mr. Padres?
Ending R1, no, I think each one has its purpose. I think we can be flexible on a case by case, but no, I do not necessarily just point blank ending it. I need to research it more, but no, I guess not. Thank you.
Well, you're not supposed to say, I don't know, but I don't know. I've never heard of this proposal, but I'd be interested in learning more about why that's being promoted as an option. Thanks.
Thank you both. All right, and for our final question, we're going to have a little fun, and we'll go with, what is your favorite restaurant in Ward 3? Mr. Dahl.
Boy, I refuse to answer that on the grounds that I'll make somebody mad. There are so many great restaurants in Ward 3. But you asked the question, so I'll have to say it. Simply because I've eaten there since the very beginning of moving to Tucson as a college student, and it's walking distance from my house now. Blue Willow. I really like the selections at Blue Willow, and I like the ambiance in there. They've always had an outdoor section, and their bean tostada. It's not really a Mexican bean tostada, but it's a delight to eat. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Padres.
Yeah, that is a very, very difficult question. We have so many goodies in Ward 3, but there's a place. I mean, even genre, we're talking Mexican, Italian, but I think Scordazzos Pizzeria, big, and Tacotote, which is next door too. Those are two of my. I know you said one, I say two, but yeah, those are excellent locations.
Thank you both for those answers. And I don't think I've been to Scordazzos, but I can attest to all the other choices. They're good choices. So we'll go ahead and go with some closing statements. Mr. Padres, if you would like to give us your closing statement.
Thank you. Once again, thank you, Pima County Democrats for hosting. And again, Kevin, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I think a lot of the things I would have said in my closing statements have already been said in the questions. I thought that was a great questionnaire. I think it really illustrates what I'm running on, what we're running on. Yes, but I would like to leave you with this. I've been around. I have the work experience, a very diverse background professionally and personally. Like I said, I've been I've been behind the counter. I've been in front of the counter. I've worked at the city, and I've had to go to development services to get plans approved. I've opened a business. I've closed a business. I've worked in private sector. I've been in banking and finance. I know it. I have the background, the very mixed and diverse background for this job, and I also have a diverse background. Like I said, I grew up in Nogales, Sonora. I came here for college and stayed. My family, my wife's from Navajo, Sonora. Half of my family is in Nogales still. I'm a person of color. I think it is very important in this conversation that Ward 3 could finally have a minority as her council member, because now it is truly half split with a minority. So I have the language, I have the energy to go talk, be out in the community, talk to our immigrants, talk to those who are most distressed, and try to help them out. I'm running for Ward 3 because I love the community, and I think I can make a difference. We're definitely not doing it for the money. It is out of heart to help our fellow neighbor. I have a lot of friends and family who live in the ward, and you keep hearing the same issues come up over and over. So it is time to address them. I will be your champion. I'd encourage you to please visit my website, votepadres.com. My whole platform is there. If you want to volunteer, any donations are very welcome, because it takes a village to do this. So votepadres.com. Once again, thank you for your time. It's been truly a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl?
Well, in closing, I want to address that I'm not just an environmentalist. As an environmentalist, I was leader of two organizations that were businesses. We sold seeds, or we sold bird watching stuff in gift shops and online. I've had to make payroll. I've had to make hard decisions, business decisions, but in a nonprofit setting where the bottom line was not just making money, but doing public good. When I launched my campaign, I did it on Earth Day, because Earth Day is very important to me. And I got 50 environmental local champions, including Congressman Grijalva, who I think likes me not just because I'm an environmentalist, but I recognize the important social work that we need to do. One of them wasn't able to come, but she sent me a late night email. And by the way, late night emails you should pay attention to. And I'm going to read you a few excerpts, because I think this speaks to the heart of the environmental movement that's paying attention and wanting to do social good as well as environmental good. Kevin, although I know you are going to be taking a strong environmental platform, I would personally recommend speaking more about how helping the environment will positively affect folks who live there. I come from a poor background. I can tell you that saving saguaros doesn't cut it if you are struggling, which a lot of people are. I would be curious about the walkability, public transit with shade structures at bike stops, bikeability of the community. Where are the gaps? Where are the green spaces and parks accessible to everyone? Are there food deserts that need to be addressed? Will climate change and other factors affect water bills? Does everyone have access to cooling as the temperatures rise? With evictions looming for many, what is the housing situation and renters' rights? What are folks most concerned about? I know I'm speaking to the choir or the choir director. You are an expert at this. And I'm not really an expert, but I'm eager to learn and become one and to work with others across the spectrum. Thank you to the organizers of this event. Thank you to the people who took time out of their weekend to come listen to Mr. Padres and me. My website is Kevin Dahl, the number 4, Tucson.com, C-O-M. And I am a clean elections candidate. Your donation will be doubled by city funds. And we're walking every weekend and many weeknights. So if you want to get some, if you've been jonesing because you haven't been able to walk door to door for Biden-Harris, come do it. And for me, and by the way, we're gearing up with many of these same people to do it next year for all our important Democratic candidates. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you to the audience for your fantastic, thoughtful questions. We appreciate your input. And join us again next weekend at the same time as we hear from our Ward 6 candidates in the City Council race. Pima Dems believe all elections are local, and so we are happy to bring our local elections and our local candidates to the community. And thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great weekend. Thank you.